Arthur Vance laughed, a brittle sound, believing his grief was his only companion. His sprawling manner, usually a sanctuary of echoing silence, felt heavy with an unspoken dread as he stepped across the threshold. The long journey finally concluded. The lingering scent of polished wood and expensive air fresheners could not mask a subtle, unsettling stillness that hung in the air, a stillness that pricked at the edges of his weary mind. He had convinced himself that his sorrow, born from his wife's untimely departure during childbirth, was a solitary burden, a wound he could manage through the relentless pursuit of business empires, leaving the day-to-day care of his precious children to others. But in that moment, something shifted deep within him, a primal alarm bell ringing faintly in the vast quiet. Then, a small, trembling voice, laced with an unimaginable desperation, pierced the oppressive calm. "Maid, please give it back!" Lily's desperate plea shattered his world, freezing the empty laughter in his soul forever. Arthur's heart, long dormant beneath layers of professional detachment and profound loss, lurched violently. He moved with a speed he hadn't known he possessed, following the sound to the sunlit conservatory, where the air, usually vibrant with the scent of blooming orchids, now felt thick with tension. The scene before him ripped through his carefully constructed emotional barriers, leaving him breathless and exposed. There, on the gleaming marble floor, was his daughter, Lily, a vibrant 6-year-old, her small frame convulsing with silent sobs. Her knees were pressed against the cold stone, her tiny hands outstretched in a futile gesture towards Ilara, the housekeeper, who stood over her. Ilara, usually a vision of impeccable composure, her uniform crisp and her smile practiced, now held a cold, almost predatory gaze fixed on the child. A faint, purplish bruise bloomed on Lily's delicate forearm, a stark, terrifying splash against her pale skin. The sight of it sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated fear through Arthur, a fear far more potent than any boardroom negotiation could ever inspire. He could not comprehend what he was witnessing, the idyllic image of his home fracturing into 1,000 menacing shards. Ilara's face, usually so deferential, now held a hint of casual cruelty, a flicker of something dark and unyielding in her eyes as she clutched a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a cherished keepsake from his late wife, just out of Lily's reach. The air crackled with the unspoken struggle between them, a silent battle that had been raging beneath the veneer of domestic tranquility. And then, the unnerving silence from the baby's room upstairs, usually filled with the gentle cooing or sleepy murmurs of his infant son, struck Arthur with a fresh wave of panic. He had dismissed it before, attributing it to the baby's nap, but now, combined with Lily's raw anguish, it felt sinister, a void echoing with unseen dangers. A guttural sound escaped Arthur's throat, a primal roar of paternal instinct. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice raw and unfamiliar even to his own ears, shattering the suffocating tableau. Ilara flinched, her carefully constructed mask slipping for a fleeting moment, revealing a flash of startled defiance, before it was quickly replaced by her usual subservient expression, though a cold glint remained in her eyes. She quickly lowered her hand, the wooden bird still firmly in her grasp, and turned to face Arthur, her posture now one of feigned innocence. Lily, startled by her father's sudden presence, scrambled to her feet, her tear-streaked face twisting with a mixture of relief and terror, her small body instinctively seeking the protection of his shadow. Arthur Vance, a man whose empire spanned continents, felt utterly powerless in that moment, his meticulously ordered world crumbling around him. His wealth, his influence, none of it could explain or undo the chilling scene he had just stumbled upon. He was a man accustomed to control, to logic, but this was a realm of raw emotion and unspoken cruelty, a world he had inadvertently allowed to fester in his absence. His wife's departure had left him with an emotional chasm, a gaping wound he had tried to fill with work, with the illusion of providing for his children from afar. He had believed Ilara, with her practiced smiles and impeccable efficiency, was a godsend, a dedicated caretaker who would nurture his children in his stead. Now, that belief felt like a bitter lie. Ilara, with her dark, calculating eyes, projected an image of unwavering loyalty, but beneath that polished surface, a cold resentment simmered. Her quiet efficiency had always seemed a testament to her dedication, yet Arthur now saw it as a veil, hiding a possessive greed for a life she felt denied, a twisted envy of the opulence that surrounded her and the family she served. He had been so lost in his own grief, so consumed by the demands of his empire, that he had overlooked the subtle shifts, the tiny fractures in the facade that now threatened to bring his entire world crashing down. The vibrant life of his 6-year-old Lily and the innocent vulnerability of his baby boy had been left to the care of a woman whose true nature remained shrouded in shadow, a terrifying realization that now gripped his heart with icy fingers. Arthur's command echoed through the conservatory, a raw, primal sound that cut through the strained silence. Ilara, her face a carefully constructed mask of surprise and concern, quickly released the small wooden bird, allowing it to clatter softly onto the marble floor. She turned to Arthur, her eyes wide and innocent, her voice a soft murmur of practiced reassurance. "Mr. Vance, you startled me. Lily was simply playing, a little upset because I wouldn't let her take her mother's keepsake outside. It's so precious, you see, and I was just trying to keep it safe from harm." Her words, smooth as silk, attempted to weave a tapestry of simple misunderstanding, but the faint tremor in her hands and the slight narrowing of her eyes betrayed a deeper, more sinister undercurrent. Lily, however, did not echo Ilara's fabricated calm. Instead, she clung to her father's leg, her small body shaking, burying her face into his trousers as if trying to disappear, her silent sobs a far more eloquent testimony than any spoken word. The bruise on her arm, a stark, purple testament to something far from innocent play, pulsed with a silent accusation, burning into Arthur's vision. That night, Arthur found himself pacing the plush carpets of his study. The grand room, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt like a cage. The weight of his wife's departure, a profound loss that had hollowed him out years ago, pressed down on him with renewed intensity. Her passing during childbirth had not only taken the light from his world, but had also left him with an emotional chasm, a gaping wound that he had tried to fill with the relentless pursuit of business empires. He had convinced himself that providing material wealth was enough, that his constant absence, masked by the demands of a global enterprise, was a necessary sacrifice. He had outsourced his fatherhood, entrusting the most precious parts of his life, Lily, a vibrant spirit despite her recent quietness, and his infant son, whose delicate cries now seemed imbued with a new, unsettling vulnerability, to Ilara, a woman he had believed to be a paragon of dedication. The guilt gnawed at him, a bitter, corrosive acid, as he recalled the countless times he had dismissed Lily's fleeting sadness or the baby's prolonged silences, attributing them to childhood whims or routine sleep. Ilara had been a godsend, or so he had thought. Her meticulous orderliness, her quiet efficiency, and her seemingly unwavering devotion to his children had painted a picture of the perfect caretaker. She spoke of her own difficult past, a childhood marked by scarcity, which Arthur had mistakenly interpreted as a source of empathy and understanding. He had seen her as a woman grateful for the opportunity to work in a home of comfort, never suspecting that beneath her polished demeanor simmered a cold resentment, a possessive greed for the opulence that surrounded her. Her eyes, whenever she looked at the family heirlooms or the children's lavish toys, held a flicker of something calculating, an almost imperceptible hunger that he had been too blind, too consumed by his own grief and ambition, to notice. Now, in the stark silence of his study, these tiny, overlooked details began to coalesce into a terrifying mosaic, revealing a sinister truth. He tried to engage Lily in conversation, to coax out the truth, but the vibrant 6-year-old, he remembered, seemed to have receded into herself. Her responses were clipped, her gaze darted away, and she spoke in hushed tones, often glancing over her shoulder, as if Ilara's shadow still loomed. "Ilara doesn't like it when I talk about things," Lily whispered one evening, her tiny fingers twisting the hem of her nightgown, a profound sadness clouding her usually bright eyes. The baby, too, exhibited unsettling changes. His once robust cries had become subdued, replaced by a quiet whimper that often went unnoticed, or a startling silence that felt more ominous than any wail. Arthur noticed doors to the children's wing occasionally locked from the outside, a detail Ilara would dismiss with a casual, "Just ensuring their safety, Mr. Vance. They shouldn't wander." Each explanation was plausible, yet each felt like another thread in a tightening web of deception. His wife, a woman of profound intuition and gentle wisdom, had always left small, thoughtful notes around the house, little reminders of her love, her hopes, her observations. Arthur, remembering this, began a quiet, almost desperate search. He moved through the manor like a phantom, his senses heightened, his heart a drumbeat of suspicion. He scrutinized Ilara's movements, observing the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture when she thought no one was watching. He noticed the way she would subtly guide Lily away from him whenever he tried to spend time alone with his daughter, her voice always sweet, yet her actions subtly controlling. The atmosphere in the grand house, once merely melancholic, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, a chilling undercurrent that whispered of secrets and hidden cruelties, pushing Arthur closer to the terrifying edge of discovery. Arthur's days dissolved into a relentless surveillance, each moment a battle against the gnawing guilt that threatened to consume him whole. He found himself meticulously tracking Ilara's movements, his eyes, once accustomed to scanning stock market tickers, now fixated on the subtle nuances of her interactions with Lily and the baby. He saw how Ilara would often dismiss Lily's requests for a particular toy or a story, her voice honeyed, but her eyes holding a glint of impatience, a fleeting shadow of annoyance that vanished the instant Arthur entered the room. The little girl, once so boisterous and full of questions, now moved with a quiet hesitancy, her small world seemingly shrinking, her laughter a rare and fragile thing. Arthur's heart ached with a profound regret, realizing how much he had missed, how deeply his grief had blinded him to the unfolding drama within his own walls. He noticed Lily's reluctance to eat certain foods, a once beloved dish now met with a shiver, an unexplained aversion that Ilara would brush off as childish pickiness. The signs, once dismissed as minor inconveniences or childish tantrums, now appeared with chilling clarity. He observed the subtle flinches from Lily when Ilara's hand moved too quickly, the way her eyes would dart to the housekeeper before responding to Arthur's questions, a silent plea for permission. One afternoon, he discovered a fresh, tender mark on the baby's arm, a faint red line that Ilara attributed to a clumsy bump against the crib. Her explanation, delivered with a practiced smile and a reassuring tone, felt hollow, utterly devoid of genuine concern. The baby, too, seemed to have retreated, his once robust cries now replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible whimper that spoke of a deeper, unspoken distress, a quiet resignation that tore at Arthur's very soul. The doors to the children's wing, which Ilara insisted were locked for their safety, now felt like barriers, imprisoning his precious children within a silent, invisible cage, a chilling realization that fueled his growing dread. Elara, sensing Arthur's increased presence, amplified her outward displays of devotion. She would fuss over the children when he was near, her voice filled with exaggerated affection, her hands gentle as she adjusted Lily's hair or stroked the baby's cheek. Yet, the moment Arthur's back was turned, the mask would slip. He once caught her rolling her eyes at Lily's tearful request for a bedtime story, her lips thinning into a hard line before she forced a saccharine smile as he re-entered the room. Her subservience to Arthur was impeccable, her efficiency unwavering, yet beneath it all, a current of cold resentment seemed to hum, an almost imperceptible vibration of disdain. He began to understand that her meticulous orderliness was not born of care, but of control, a need to impose her will on everything and everyone around her, especially those she deemed vulnerable. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Arthur began to delve into the past, specifically into the cherished belongings of his beloved wife. He remembered her habit of leaving small, insightful notes, not just reminders, but often observations about people and events. His search led him to her private study, a room she had claimed as her sanctuary, filled with her books, her art supplies, and the faint, comforting scent of her favorite lavender. He carefully sifted through her diaries, her correspondence, her hidden nooks, his fingers tracing the familiar script of her elegant handwriting. It was there, tucked inside a worn copy of her favorite poetry book, that he found it. A small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a delicate wax impression of a lily, his daughter's namesake. His heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread, a premonition that this simple letter held a truth he was both desperate and terrified to uncover. The letter, addressed to him, was dated just weeks before her departure. Her words, imbued with her gentle wisdom, spoke of her concerns, her subtle unease regarding Elara. She wrote of Elara's intense possessiveness over certain household items, her strange comments about the children's future, and a vague, unsettling feeling that something was amiss beneath the housekeeper's flawless exterior. "My love," she had written, "I fear Elara's devotion is not as pure as it seems. There is a hunger in her eyes, a desire for something beyond her station, and I worry for our little ones when she looks at them." Her words were a chilling premonition, a final, heartbreaking warning from beyond the veil. The letter was not a direct accusation, but a mother's instinct, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the silence of their lives, a bell Arthur had been too consumed by his own sorrow to hear. This revelation ignited a cold fury within Arthur, a searing fire that burned away the last vestiges of his self-pity and grief. His wife, even in her fragility, had seen what he, in his strength, had failed to perceive. The letter was not just a clue. It was a testament to her enduring love, a final act of protection for their children. He looked at the faces of Lily and the baby, their innocence a stark contrast to the darkness that had encroached upon their lives, and a fierce resolve hardened his gaze. He began to spend more time with them, not just observing, but actively engaging, reading Lily stories, holding the baby close, trying to mend the fractured bonds. He noticed the tentative smiles returning to Lily's face, the way the baby's small hand would instinctively grasp his finger, tiny sparks of connection that promised a path back to a love he had almost forgotten. The house, once a monument to his grief, now felt like a battleground, and Arthur, armed with his wife's truth and a father's rekindled love, was ready to fight. Arthur Vance, a man who built an empire on meticulous planning and relentless observation, now turned his formidable intellect inward, transforming his grand home into a silent theater of surveillance. The raw fury ignited by his wife's letter had settled into a cold, calculated resolve, a steady flame that fueled his every move. He spent sleepless nights installing discreet cameras, tiny eyes hidden within the ornate cornices, and shadowed corners of the children's wing and key common areas. Each lens a silent sentinel against the darkness that had crept into their lives. Every evening, long after Ilara had retired to her quarters, Arthur would review the footage, his heart a leaden weight in his chest, as he watched, horrified, the subtle shifts in her demeanor. He witnessed the fleeting moments when her saccharine smile dissolved into a sneer, the casual disregard with which she would sometimes ignore Lily's pleas, or the abrupt, almost violent way she would handle the baby when she thought no one was watching. He saw Lily's small shoulders slump in defeat, her vibrant spirit slowly dimming under the weight of unseen pressures, and the baby's quiet whimpers, often left unattended, a chilling testament to the cold indifference that had replaced genuine care. His investigation extended beyond the visual. Arthur delved into the meticulously kept household accounts, a system he had always trusted Ilara to manage with unwavering honesty. He scrutinized every ledger, every receipt, every bank statement, his keen business acumen now a weapon wielded in defense of his family. It wasn't long before the subtle discrepancies began to emerge, like tiny cracks in a perfectly painted facade. Small, consistent sums of money, just significant enough to be overlooked in the vastness of his fortune, but too regular to be coincidental, were being diverted. There were phantom expenses for children's supplies that never materialized, double billings for services, and unexplained transfers to a personal account that belonged to Ilara. Then, a more jarring discovery, a collection of antique silver trinkets, cherished heirlooms from his wife's family, once displayed prominently in the parlor, were missing. Ilara, when subtly questioned about their whereabouts, offered a vague explanation about having them polished and stored away for safekeeping, her eyes momentarily flitting away, a telltale sign of her deception. The air in the Vance manor grew thick with unspoken tension, a silent battle of wills playing out beneath the surface of everyday life. Arthur, armed with his growing body of evidence, began to test Ilara, his questions becoming more pointed, his gaze more unwavering. He would inquire about the missing silver, or comment on a particular financial anomaly, watching her carefully. Her practiced composure, once unshakable, now showed fleeting cracks, a slight hesitation in her voice, a momentary flicker of fear in her eyes, before she quickly regained her mask of polite subservience. She would deflect, offer plausible but ultimately hollow explanations, and then subtly shift her tactics, attempting to isolate the children further, subtly discouraging Lily from speaking to her father about anything personal, or ensuring the baby was always asleep or occupied when Arthur sought to spend time with him. Her manipulation was a venomous undercurrent, a constant pressure designed to maintain her control. Yet, as Ilara's grip tightened, Arthur's connection with his children deepened with every conscious effort. He made time, not just for observation, but for genuine presence. He would sit with Lily for hours, reading her favorite stories, his voice a soothing balm against the anxieties that had plagued her. He held his baby son, feeling the warmth of the tiny body against his, a profound sense of paternal love washing over him, slowly mending the emotional chasm that his grief had carved. Lily, sensing her father's unwavering protection, began to tentatively emerge from her shell. One afternoon, while drawing, she presented him with a picture, a vibrant, smiling family, but in the corner, a shadowy figure with sharp, angry lines for a face. "That's the maid," Lily whispered, her eyes wide. "She makes the happy go away sometimes." It was a small, yet devastating revelation, confirming Arthur's deepest fears and solidifying his resolve. The baby, too, seemed to respond to his father's renewed attention, his quiet whimpers slowly giving way to more robust coos and joyful gurgles whenever Arthur was near, tiny blossoms of trust unfurling in the once stifled atmosphere. Ilara, sensing the shift, The palpable strengthening of the bond between Arthur and his children became increasingly agitated. Her meticulous orderliness began to fray at the edges. She would snap at other staff members, her movements growing more abrupt, her practiced smiles becoming strained and brittle. She tried to undermine Arthur's efforts, subtly telling Lily that her father was too busy for games, or suggesting to Arthur that the baby was too sensitive for too much handling. But Arthur, no longer blinded by grief or trust, saw through her thinly veiled attempts. He understood now that her resentment was not just about wealth, but about control, a twisted desire to possess the affection and loyalty of those she deemed her captives. The house, once a sanctuary of quiet sorrow, had transformed into a crucible where a father's love was being forged anew, strong enough to confront the insidious darkness that had taken root within its very walls. Arthur Vance, no longer merely observing, moved with a calculated precision, each step a deliberate chess move in a game he was determined to win. His wife's letter had been a torch, illuminating the dark corners of Ilara's carefully constructed facade, revealing not just petty theft, but a deeper, more insidious agenda. He discovered, buried within a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts, a complex scheme Ilara had orchestrated, slowly siphoning off significant portions of his assets, not just for immediate gain, but to establish a financial foothold, a web of control that, over time, would allow her to manipulate the very fabric of his family's inheritance. She had, with chilling foresight, been subtly altering legal documents, impersonating his late wife's distant relatives in correspondence with his estate lawyers, slowly positioning herself to become a de facto guardian of the children's trust funds, weaving a narrative of indispensable loyalty that would grant her ultimate power over their future, and, by extension, Arthur's dwindling fortune. The sheer audacity of her plan, born from a bitter resentment of her own humble beginnings and a burning desire to claim the life she believed she deserved, sent a cold shiver down Arthur's spine, a stark realization of the evil he had unknowingly harbored. The revelation of Ilara's true identity, a woman with a history of similar manipulative endeavors in other wealthy households, solidified Arthur's resolve. He found old news clippings, obscure online forums, and whispered rumors from former employers, all painting a picture of a woman who preyed on vulnerability, exploiting grief and trust to systematically dismantle families from within, always emerging with a substantial portion of their wealth. Her past was littered with broken promises and shattered lives, a trail of quiet destruction that had gone largely unnoticed due to her cunning ability to cover her tracks and exploit the very systems designed to protect the vulnerable. The carefully cultivated persona of the devoted housekeeper was merely a sophisticated shield, a deceptive illusion designed to disarm and exploit. Arthur felt a surge of profound shame for his own blindness, for allowing his sorrow to obscure the warning signs, for failing to protect his children from such a calculated predator. Arthur decided to confront her subtly, laying traps of his own. One evening, he purposely left a seemingly important legal document, a draft of a revised trust fund agreement, on his study desk, knowing Ilara had a habit of tidying his papers. The document contained a fabricated clause that would significantly reduce the children's future inheritance if certain conditions were not met, conditions that Ilara's current actions would directly violate. The next morning, he observed her closely. Her movements were stiffer, her eyes darted nervously to the desk, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her hands as she served breakfast. Later that day, he found the document subtly altered, the fabricated clause highlighted, and a new handwritten annotation in the margin, suggesting a clarification that would effectively nullify its impact, an act of brazen manipulation that confirmed her deep involvement and her frantic efforts to protect her illicit gains. The atmosphere in the manor became a suffocating shroud, thick with unspoken accusations and simmering tension. Elara, sensing Arthur's increased scrutiny, grew visibly agitated. Her practiced smiles became brittle, cracking at the edges, and her voice, once so smooth, occasionally held a sharp, clipped tone when she thought Arthur was out of earshot. She began to lash out at the other household staff, her temper flaring over trivial matters, revealing glimpses of the cruel, controlling woman beneath the veneer of subservience. Lily, ever observant, noticed the change, clutching Arthur's hand more tightly whenever Elara entered a room, her small body tensing with an almost palpable fear. The baby, too, would often whimper softly, turning his face away from Elara's touch, seeking the comfort of Arthur's arms with an undeniable urgency. These subtle, yet powerful reactions from his children were more damning than any written evidence, reinforcing Arthur's conviction and fueling his determination to expose the truth. Arthur continued to gather his evidence, meticulously compiling the video footage, the financial records, the altered documents, and the damning research into Elara's past. He understood that he needed more than just suspicion. He needed an undeniable, irrefutable case to ensure she would never harm another child. His reconnection with Lily flourished in these tense days, as she found courage in his unwavering presence. One afternoon, while Arthur was tucking her into bed, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Elara said, "If I ever told you about the bad things, you would send me away, like Mommy went away." The words struck Arthur like a physical blow, a chilling confirmation of Elara's psychological abuse, her cruel manipulation of a child's deepest fears. He held Lily close, rocking her gently, promising her with every fiber of his being that he would never let anyone hurt her again, a vow that echoed through the quiet halls of the manor, sealing Elara's fate. The chilling confession from Lily's trembling lips solidified Arthur's resolve into an unbreakable fortress. The words, "Elara said, if I ever told you about the bad things, you would send me away, like Mommy went away," echoed in the quiet nursery, a testament to the insidious cruelty that had been inflicted upon his innocent child. He held Lily tighter, feeling the fragile beat of her heart against his own, a silent promise forming in the depths of his soul. No more fear, no more shadows. His grief, once a consuming fog, now burned away, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. He knew then that the time for observation was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. Every piece of evidence, every video clip, every altered document, every whispered rumor of Elara's past manipulations coalesced into an undeniable truth, a weapon forged in love and desperation. Arthur spent the remainder of the night in his study, the grand room now a war room, meticulously organizing his findings, ensuring every detail was irrefutable, every accusation backed by concrete proof. He reached out to trusted legal counsel, his voice firm and unwavering, outlining the gravity of the situation, the chilling narrative of deceit and abuse. Elara, meanwhile, felt the subtle shift in the manor's atmosphere, a cold current of change that pricked at the edges of her carefully constructed composure. Arthur's eyes, once clouded with grief and distance, now held a piercing clarity, a watchful intensity that made her skin crawl. She saw the children gravitating more and more towards him, Lily's tentative smiles blossoming into genuine laughter when her father was near, the baby's once quiet whimpers replaced by joyful gurgles in Arthur's arms. Her control, the very foundation of her elaborate scheme, was crumbling. Her meticulously maintained facade began to crack under the pressure, revealing glimpses of the bitter, resentful woman beneath. She grew increasingly paranoid, her gaze darting suspiciously at every shadow, every fleeting sound. She would often stand outside Arthur's study door, her ear pressed against the polished wood, trying to decipher the hushed conversations, the low murmur of voices that spoke of secrets she was desperate to uncover. The opulence of the Vance Manor, once a symbol of her impending triumph, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in a web of her own making. One afternoon, Arthur, with a quiet confidence that unnerved Ilara, approached her in the kitchen. He held a small antique silver locket, one of the missing heirlooms retrieved from a pawn shop receipt he had traced, hidden amongst her personal effects. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as he extended the locket towards her. "Ilara," he said, his voice devoid of anger, yet heavy with an unspoken accusation, "do you remember this? It belonged to my wife's grandmother. Lily was asking about it." Ilara's face, usually so composed, paled instantly. Her hands, which had been deftly arranging flowers, trembled violently, scattering petals across the pristine countertop. Her eyes, wide with a sudden, dawning terror, darted from the locket to Arthur's face, searching for any hint of accusation, any sign of how much he truly knew. She stammered, attempting to concoct a plausible lie, her usual smooth excuses failing her in the face of his quiet certainty. The air crackled with the unspoken truth, a silent acknowledgement that her carefully built empire of deception was teetering on the brink. Later that week, Arthur arranged for a quiet yet firm intervention. He invited a trusted family friend, a woman of sharp intellect and compassionate heart, a distant relative of his late wife, to the manor under the guise of a social visit. This woman, Mrs. Albright, had a keen eye for human nature and had always harbored a subtle skepticism about Ilara's overly perfect demeanor. Arthur, with Lily safely playing in a separate part of the house under the watchful eye of a newly hired temporary nanny, sat with Mrs. Albright in the study, reviewing the compiled evidence. The video footage, projected onto a hidden screen, showed Ilara's true face, the quick, cruel pinch to Lily's arm when she thought no one was watching, the deliberate neglect of the baby's cries, the venomous whispers she directed at the children when Arthur was absent. The financial documents laid bare the intricate web of theft and manipulation, the subtle shifts in inheritance papers, all painting a damning picture of premeditated malice. Mrs. Albright, her face etched with a mix of horror and profound sadness, listened intently as Arthur explained the full extent of Ilara's betrayal. Her heart ached for Lily and the baby, for the silent suffering they had endured under the guise of care. She confirmed Arthur's suspicions about Ilara's past, recalling a vague rumor from years ago about a similar incident in a neighboring state, a wealthy family whose estate had been mysteriously depleted after their beloved housekeeper departed. Her presence provided not just emotional support, but an independent witness, a crucial ally in Arthur's quest for justice. The weight of the truth, once a solitary burden for Arthur, now felt shared, a collective determination to protect the innocent and expose the darkness. The stage was set, not for a quiet dismissal, but for a formal reckoning, a confrontation born of necessity and fueled by a father's rekindled love. The day of reckoning arrived with a heavy silence, a palpable tension that clung to the very air within the grand study of the Vance Manor. Arthur had chosen this room for its solemnity, its imposing mahogany and leather speaking of gravitas and unyielding truth. Seated opposite him, at the expansive antique desk, were his legal counsel, Mr. Davies, a man whose reputation for meticulousness was legendary, and Mrs. Albright, her presence a silent testament to loyalty and compassion. Ilara was summoned, unaware of the meticulously constructed trap that awaited her. She entered, her usual composed demeanor barely masking a flicker of apprehension, her eyes scanning the faces in the room, searching for a hint of the reason for this unusual gathering. Her smile, usually so practiced, was a brittle thing, ready to shatter at the slightest provocation. Arthur observed her, a cold, hard knot of resolve tightening in his chest, knowing that the battle for his children's future, for their very souls, was about to begin. Arthur's voice, calm and measured, sliced through the quiet, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath its surface. He began by recounting the initial incident, the chilling sight of Lily on her knees, the desperate plea, the faint bruise. Ilara interjected quickly, her voice a practiced blend of concern and indignation, claiming Lily was prone to dramatics, perhaps a fall, a childish exaggeration. Her eyes met Arthur's, a challenge in their depths, a desperate attempt to maintain her carefully crafted illusion. But Arthur was no longer susceptible to her cunning. He then moved to the financial discrepancies, presenting a ledger with highlighted entries, a printout of the suspicious bank transfers, and the receipts for non-existent children's supplies. Ilara's composure began to fray at the edges, a vein throbbing faintly in her temple. She tried to dismiss it as administrative errors, a misunderstanding, her explanations becoming more convoluted, less convincing. Mr. Davies, with a quiet authority, then produced the pawnshop receipt for the antique silver locket, pairing it with the corresponding entry in Ilara's personal bank statement showing a deposit of an identical sum on the same day. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusation. Ilara's face, once pale, now flushed with a mottled red, her eyes darting wildly between the documents and the faces of those assembled. She stammered, denying any knowledge, claiming it must be a mistake, a frame-up, her voice rising slightly in pitch. Mrs. Albright, with a gentle but firm tone, then spoke, recalling the vague rumors she had heard years ago, the unsettling similarities to other cases, the pattern of exploitation that seemed to follow Ilara's path. Her words were a quiet, yet powerful blow, chipping away at Ilara's crumbling facade, exposing the depth of her malicious intent. The climax of the confrontation arrived with the chilling evidence from the hidden cameras. Arthur, with a click of a remote, projected the footage onto a discreet screen that slid silently from a recessed panel in the wall. The first clip showed Ilara, her back to the camera, roughly yanking Lily's arm, a quick, sharp movement that left the child whimpering, her small face contorted in pain and fear. Another clip revealed Ilara ignoring the baby's desperate cries for several minutes, her expression a mask of cold indifference as she scrolled through her phone. Then came the most damning footage. Ilara, late at night, in Arthur's study, subtly altering the legal document, her face illuminated by the screen, a look of cunning satisfaction etched upon it. Each clip played in agonizing silence, a stark, undeniable testament to her cruelty and deceit. Ilara watched, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Her carefully constructed world of lies imploded before her very eyes. Her face contorted, all pretense of subservience vanishing, replaced by a raw, unbridled fury. She lunged forward, a guttural cry escaping her lips, attempting to smash the screen, to destroy the evidence that condemned her. Two security personnel, positioned discreetly outside the room, entered swiftly, restraining her with practiced ease. Her carefully cultivated persona shattered completely, revealing the venomous resentment that had festered within her. She screamed, her voice hoarse and ragged, a torrent of bitter accusations pouring forth. She railed against Arthur's wealth, his perceived indifference, her own life of perceived hardship, twisting her actions into a perverse form of twisted justice, a desperate justification for her monstrous deeds. She shrieked about how Arthur deserved to suffer, how his grief had made him weak, how the children were nothing but burdens that she had been forced to bear, her words laced with a profound, terrifying hatred. She confessed, in her enraged outburst, to manipulating the trust funds, to slowly draining his assets, to her grand plan of seizing control, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and a chilling sense of entitlement. Her eyes, bloodshot and wild, locked onto Arthur's, a promise of eternal malice burning within them. The air in the room crackled with the sheer force of her unmasking, the horrifying truth of her character laid bare for all to see. It was a terrifying spectacle, a raw display of a soul consumed by bitterness and greed, a chilling crescendo to the long, silent battle for justice. The outburst, far from undermining Arthur's case, solidified it, adding a chilling personal confirmation to every piece of evidence. The resolution was no longer just about financial restitution or simple dismissal. It was about protecting two innocent lives from a predator unmasked. Elara's screams slowly faded into the sterile silence of the manor, her raw bitterness echoing long after she was escorted away by the security personnel, her fury a chilling testament to the darkness she harbored. The room, once filled with her venom, now felt cleansed, yet heavy with the emotional residue of her unmasking. Arthur stood, his body trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of the battle fought and won. Trustees, Albright placed a comforting hand on his arm, her eyes filled with a profound sadness for the lost innocence, but also with a quiet admiration for his unwavering resolve. Mr. Davies nodded solemnly, the legal wheels already turning to ensure justice would be swift and unyielding. The evidence was irrefutable, her confession in her rage, a final, damning piece to the puzzle. Elara's intricate web of deceit, spun from greed and resentment, had finally unraveled, leaving her exposed and accountable for every cruel act. The immediate aftermath was a blur of legal proceedings, statements, and the quiet, dignified process of ensuring Elara faced the full consequences of her actions, her future now confined to the cold, unforgiving walls of justice, her malice finally contained. 2 years later, the Vance Manor, once a gilded cage of sorrow and deception, hummed with a vibrant, joyful energy. The grand rooms, once echoing with Arthur's grief and the children's silent fear, now resonated with laughter and the gentle sounds of a family truly alive. Arthur, no longer consumed by his work or shadowed by his past, had found his truest purpose in the unconditional love he poured into his children. Lily, now a bright and confident 8-year-old, scampered through the sun-drenched garden, her small hands digging enthusiastically in the rich earth alongside her father, planting colorful blooms that mirrored the new life flourishing within their home. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, now sparkled with an unburdened joy, her trusting hand often seeking Arthur's, a silent affirmation of their unbreakable bond. The baby, now a boisterous 2-year-old boy, chased after butterflies, his infectious giggles filling the air, his every movement a testament to the safety and love that enveloped him. Family meals were no longer somber affairs, but lively gatherings, filled with stories and shared moments, Arthur's presence a constant, reassuring anchor. He had learned to embrace the chaos and beauty of fatherhood, to find solace, not in solitude, but in the sticky hands and warm hugs of his children. The scars of the past remained, a quiet reminder of what they had overcome, but they no longer defined their present or dictated their future. Arthur had built a new legacy, not of wealth, but of fierce protection, unwavering truth, and an enduring, boundless love. The journey had been arduous, marked by pain and revelation, but it had led them to this place of profound healing and renewed hope. It taught them that, even in the darkest corners of human nature, the light of truth and the power of love can ultimately prevail. What would you do to protect a child, to mend a broken spirit, to rebuild a shattered home? How far would your courage take you in the face of injustice? Share your thoughts and be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. Remember, the malice of the world will be punished, goodness will find its reward, and justice is always built on truth, courage, and unconditional love.